Hello everyone, thank you very much for watching this live event. Today we'll continue our discussion on how to configure the Spring Security Authorization Server. I'm glad to be back. If you're watching this event live, don't forget that you have a live chat there, so I will keep an eye on the live chat as usual. If you're watching the event recorded, you can still ask questions in the comment section, or you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm going to directly share my screen and I will continue the previous lesson. It was some time ago. In case you need a refresher, I do recommend you go back and review that lesson, because I will not spend the time to recreate the example. I decided to start from the exactly the way we left our example in the previous lesson. And we will continue with different customizations so that we save time. So what you see here, I shared my screen, you see my IntelliJ, and I've replicated the project, the previous project, exactly the way we left it. I will go fast through all the configurations that we wrote last time, but I will not write them again. And then I will continue with some different things that you want to know about creating your authorization server. So we start from the POM XML file just to make sure that we have a better idea from the very beginning on what we discussed. So what we have in the POM XML file is simply the web dependency and accompanied by the Spring Security OAuth2 Authorization Server version 1.0.0. So these are exactly the two dependencies that we used last time. And then if you remember, I wrote a configuration file where I had to add a couple of security filter chains, one of them being used to set up the form login authentication method, and the other one used to configure the authorization server, mainly here because I'm using the authorization code grant type. I need to make sure that any unauthorized access to any resource of the authorization server will be redirected to the login page, because remember from some lessons ago when we discussed about grant types, and of course one of the grant types, one of the most important grant types that we discussed was the authorization code grant type that you probably find in 90+% of the cases out there. The user gets redirected to the authorization server login page, introduces their credentials, and the authorization server redirects them back in browser, providing a code, and we call that code the authorization code. And that code is then used by the client to call again the authorization server and ask for an access token that in most cases is a JWT, which is a non-opaque token. Today I will also show you how to configure opaque tokens. But yeah, the idea is so that this filter is the minimum configuration that I need to be able to use this authorization server with the authorization code grant type. And then of course you need to manage users, so that's where you have the standard user detail service. I remember someone asked me in a comment some days or weeks ago, they told me, why am I still using this in-memory user details manager and the no password encoder, and why I'm not using something like storing in the database? And I answered, in my examples, unless I focus explicitly on implementing the user details service and the password encoder, I will make use of in-memory implementations to save time. Because in the end, this is the normal user details service that we have used from the first lessons of this playlist, and is that simple interface with only one method that receives the username and returns the user details under the contract user details recognized by Spring Security. We already discussed this even from the first couple of lessons. And the password encoder, indeed, you will not use the no password encoder in practice, because where it's called no-op for a reason, and it's tracked out not because it's deprecated, but because you should never use it. And that's because it doesn't encrypt or hash the password anyhow. You will most likely use something like bcrypt password encoder. And at some point, maybe in the next lesson, I will show you how to maybe we will go and we will demonstrate how to store the users and the clients in the database. But again, the procedure is very simple and is the same thing that we did with a normal Spring Security without any authorization server dependency and stuff like that in the first couple of lessons, okay? But again, to save time, let's keep our simple user. We have a user, its username is user, its password is password. It has an authority because it has to have at least an authority or a role, and it's kept in memory for our demonstration purposes. And again, I use the no password encoder just because it's simple and easy and it allows you focus on what we are doing. And then of course, being an authorization server, it serves clients. Clients are those applications requiring tokens, access tokens to get access to their backends. So the clients themselves, they need to be recognized by the authorization server. So that's why always we will have to implement client management in an authorization server, and the client management very similar to how the user management works, is defined through a very simple bean, and the contract representing it is an interface. It's just a little bit more complex than the user details service. It also has a save method, a find by ID, meaning find by internal ID, and find by client ID, meaning find by the public client ID, which is the client's username, if you want to say it like that. Of course, it's not really correct because it's not a username unless you have a user, but you can imagine that what username is for user, the client ID is for client, okay? So the client ID identifies the application itself, the client application requiring tokens to be able to get access to the resources exposed by their backend. Again, guys, at this moment, I do assume that you know some things about OAuth2 and OpenID Connect, and in case you are here for the first time, remember that we had some discussions in the previous lessons. I will not be able to have the same discussion every time and describe what OAuth2 and OpenID Connect is. So in case this is not really clear yet, remember you can always go back and it's free to review all my videos on this channel and review the videos on OAuth2 and OpenID Connect if things like the grant types and tokens are not clear yet, okay? And this is the registered client repository. The way we defined it here, it's again an in-memory implementation, but same as you can do with a user detail service. You can have an implementation, you can define your implementation that, for example, stores these details in a database. Very easy. Implement this interface. Again, 3 methods, you have to override them. Maybe next time we will go over this just to make sure that everything is really clear with it. And then there are a few things, a few characteristics of the client that you need to have. Besides the credentials, you can't have a client without credentials. They are the way the client authenticates against the authorization server whenever it calls the authorization server. If you set, of course, if you set a method that requires authentication, the method is actually this one. I can even put it just behind, just below the credentials, because basically I have the credentials, and then if you don't set a basic secret credentials authentication, then the credentials are not really very useful. Of course, the client ID is still useful because it's the client name if you want, but probably you won't use the secret. But that's never the case in practice. You will always have authentication. So you have the credentials, you have the method used, and then you have the scopes. You can have as many scopes as you want. See, there's multiple scopes that you can add here. That's why if you have the details in a database, Maybe if we implement that next time, I will simplify it with only one table, but in a real world application, you will most likely need multiple tables and one-to-many relationships, or even many-to-many, depending on the way you design your table relationships. And then you have the redirect URI, which can also be URIs, so you can have multiple URIs. That's the way it should work. You have the grant types that the client supports. The client may support multiple grant types. Usually the main grant types that you will use are the authorization code, refresh token if you want to allow your client to use refresh tokens to get tokens without needing the user to re-authenticate. We discussed that in a previous lesson. And the client credentials, if you want the client to be able to call the authorization server without needing at all a user access. But usually that's the case when you have service-to-service communication, or you have some kind of a tool like your orchestrator. Say you have your service deployed with Kubernetes and you want Kubernetes to authenticate against the for example, liveness and readiness probes, then you will most likely have Kubernetes as a client, and it doesn't need, of course, a user. There is no user there, so you will basically use client credentials grant type to allow Kubernetes call the authorization server, get the token, use the token to get the liveness and readiness probes. And I said Kubernetes, but you can have implementations like service meshes, for example. You use Istio. There are dozens of cases in which this kind of service-to-service authentication is needed, and then you would need to use, we can just put it here for the sake of the example. We will not use it, but for the sake of the example, you can put it here to remember the client credentials grant type. And that's the minimum, of course, you need. Today, I will also show you that you can have some more client settings set up and token settings depending on what you want to use. And then these are the main server settings where you can, for example, override the endpoints. And you need at least, if you have JVT tokens, we discussed in the previous lessons, they are signed. You need a key to sign. You need actually a key pair, because you will have the public. Usually you will use asymmetric key pairs, so you will have a secret key used to sign the token, and then a public key which will be exposed through an endpoint. That's everything that we did last time. I will not take it again. I just put the main URIs here, and when I will put this on my GitHub account, you will have them and you will be able just to copy paste them, and I will also use them in my demonstration to get some endpoints. Let's see what questions you have in the live chat, and then I will go back and show you. The first thing today is how to customize the JVT token. So what I will do, I will test my implementation here. I will show you how the JVT token looks like, and then I will show you how to add, for example, one more claim in case you want to add one more claim. And then after we do that, one of the things we can discuss also is how to use opaque tokens instead of non-opaque tokens, even though opaque tokens are not so often than non-opaque tokens, and mostly today, as I said, 99% of the cases probably use and will continue using non-opaque tokens and mainly JVT tokens. Knowledge of having the opaque tokens and what introspection is can be really useful from time to time. So how to do the concurrent session control at Spring Cloud Gateway. Max login session per user. Wow, this is a really complicated. Rajiv, sorry for that. I will not answer it. I'm not even sure that I know how to answer it. I'm not even sure that I understood the whole question, but it sounds really complex for this demonstration. So let's keep that for a different discussion. If you want, maybe add me on LinkedIn and let's have a discussion there, because what you ask here, I might not even know out of by heart how to implement. It would be cool to see some examples with Spring Cloud in the future. Okay, guys, I will try to add Spring Cloud at some point. Although, to be honest with you, I'm not really an expert in all the dependencies of Spring Cloud, although I used some of them, like the Spring Cloud Gateway. Okay, and then again, I'm not sure what happens, but I see a lot of questions about Spring Cloud. Let's leave them for later, because again, I'm not sure I can answer them today. Why internal client IDs is necessary, meaning why regular client ID? That's actually that's a very good question. So your question is, why the heck do we have here two kinds of IDs? And the idea is that usually when you have any kind of implementation where you expose some detail outside, it's good never to expose the ID, which represents the real primary key in the database. In most cases, the ID used to define the primary key will be, if possible, numeric. And that's because if, for example, if you use a SQL database, the SQL database's indexes work much better on numeric values than on string values. And anyway, whenever you will have a primary key, even if you don't have it as numeric, still for performance and indexes purposes, probably you will keep it at a minimum, and you will have some restriction in the way you can define it there. For example, you might have a UUID, but in that case, the UUID will have a specific UUID type, unique identifier type at the database level as well, for the same reason, to be easier for the DBs to index it. And then for security purposes, you will never expose that outside, because you don't want someone to, for example, if you put it in a URL, to be able to simply put a number there and hack somehow your system. Maybe you forget to put some conditions, some restrictions there, and then you might risk, it's more riskier in terms of introducing vulnerabilities. So it's better to have an ID that is public, that is always different from the one that you use as internal. So that's as a best practice, is better to have separate the ID used as a primary key versus the ID used as a client ID. Is it possible to change the ID token expiry time? Yes, that's possible. We can even do that today. You will see it's pretty simple. Actually, you just have to set one line for that. Now, going back, hopefully I answered the part of the questions at least. Let me start this application, and after starting it, it's actually already started. Let me restart it just to make sure I'm cleanly starting from the beginning. I will take the URL, the primary URL here is the authorized one. If you remember, we discussed this is where the client redirects the user for login, which means that once I will call this URL in a window, say this window, okay, I will be redirected to the login page, and then I'm going to Postman, and I will try to obtain the access token. So I'm going to take this and put it in my browser here, and here I am, user and password, sign in, and of course, yeah, Spring 1IO, just because that's the way I configured it. Probably the redirect URI for me is configured to be this one, but you can literally have anything here. Actually, in this case, we don't have a client, so we just simulate it, so this page doesn't really exist. So if you for example just add, I don't know, abc.com, you might get a 404 like page not found, but that's because the page really doesn't exist, so it's not a problem. The idea is that we got what we wanted, because if you look in the browser's address bar, you see that we got back the authorization code, because that's what we wanted. And now you can take it and you will simulate what exactly the client will do through Postman. So you just get Postman, you get and you add the authorization code here. Be very careful, it's usable only once, so even if this doesn't work, I will not be able to reuse it. I will always have to generate another authorization code. Make sure that you use the basic client secret. I think I forgot to show that in the previous lessons, and someone was really upset with me because they didn't understand why it doesn't work for them, and then they realized that indeed I forgot to show you that I'm using basic authentication, which is actually the reason I add this line 89 here, where I say I'm using basic authentication, otherwise it won't work, okay? And then I say send. When I say send, you can see I get the access and I get the ID token because I configured my authorization server to not only use OAuth2 but also OpenID Connect above. Otherwise, if I wouldn't have this configuration, it would have only generated my access token as per normal OAuth2 specification. But because I have OpenID, I get the ID token. That's anyway less important. That only depends on how you want to implement your system. But at the same time, the access token is what we are interested in at the moment. So I will open a JVT.io and we will inspect the token here, and you will see how it looks like. Yeah, we have the key ID and we have some details which are default. Now the question is what you do if you want to change the payload data. It's very common to need to add different things to your token. So my recommendation is never add too many things to a token. The token should be as small as possible, because remember, the token will be signed with a cryptographic algorithm. So the more data we will have, the more difficult it will be to sign the token. Moreover, if you send the token, because the protocol is stateless, you have to send the token every time over the network to the resource server. The larger is, the more difficult it is to send it. So keep your token just to a minimum, just to its purpose, which is what you need to apply the authorization restrictions. You don't need on the token more than that. Everything else can be taken then from the database if you really need anything else. Now, if you want to configure your authorization server to have specific claims, you will have to use something like OAuth2 token customizer, I think it was. And then because I use a JVT token, I need to use this JVT encoding context as a generic type, and this needs to be a bean in the Spring context. And then this is, as you can see, it's a very simple functional interface, so I can directly say something like context and implement it through a lambda expression. Now I have everything I need. So now I can just say context, get claims, and then I add a claim, and I can add whatever claim I want. So let's just add here some for demonstration purposes some claim, but as an idea in the context itself, you have a lot of things, including authorization details, the principal, the client, the authorization scope. So in case you want to add some conditions, so you want the token to be changed only for a specific client, or you want to put the scopes as a different name because your resource server doesn't recognize it. For example, for this was a common problem when you are using Keycloak as an authorization server and the Spring Boot resource server. We will discuss resource server in one of the next lessons. You have, as an idea, in the context, you have all the details you need. If you need to add a condition or do something or get some data, it's very easy to get them directly from this context. As you can see here, you have all of them here, grant types and so on. You take them, you put them on the token if you want that. So I will not demonstrate with every possibility because it doesn't make sense. But with just this very simple change, you will see that you can easily add a claim in the token. And you can imagine now you can add any kind of claim, of course, in the token. If you are able to add this test claim, it means you can add any kind of token. And we don't necessarily need to lose more time on this subject. But I need to redo everything, so I'm going to again go here, take the URL, blah 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 blah. Okay, is it? Go here, login again, user, password. get the authorization code, go to the postman, make sure, I'm sure this is token. Oh, this is not needed, guys. This is probably from a different example. Okay, and send it, and we get a new access token. We take it, we put it in JVTIO, and you see your new token your new claim has been added in the token. Okay, let's see, why do we have to put a redirect URI in the link as well as the client table? Very good question, Joseph, thank you very much. So the OAuth2 specification says like this, the redirect URI needs to be requested by the client but also known by the server, and only if the two match, then only in that case you will be able to access the token, otherwise you will not be. So actually it is here in the URL because it's always the client that requests a redirection to a specific link, and then the server should redirect the client to exactly that URI that the client requested to be redirected to. Remember that there can be multiple redirecting URIs, which means that if I have multiple URIs, the server would not know to which URI should redirect the client unless the client specifically tells them where to be redirected. So basically, this one in the URI is the request of the client, is where the client wants the server to redirect them after successful authentication. But at the same time, it can't only be here, because if you would have it only in the URI, what can happen, it would be very risky. What can happen would be that someone gets in the middle, change the URI, and then gets the authorization code to them. So it would be vulnerable. So because of that, it's also a must that the URI should also be known previously by the server, and the server should only redirect the client to one of the known URIs. If the server doesn't know the URI, it doesn't matter that the client requests a redirect, the server will not redirect them to any URI, it's only to a known URI. So that's why you need to have them in the URL where the client requests it, but also at the configuration at the server level. I hope that that's clear now. Does the authorization server has a user info endpoint? A very good question also. Yes, it has. And if you go in Postman, actually you can, and I always do this, the well-known OpenID configuration is a standard URI that exposes the OpenID configuration of any authorization server supporting the OpenID Connect protocol. Since our server does that, we should be able to call this endpoint, and when you call this endpoint, where is it? Here it is. When you call this endpoint, you get all the details, including the user info endpoint, which by default is named user info, but if you want to override it, you can override it through the hopefully authorization server. Here I think you can override the user info as well. See? So if you want a different user info endpoint, you can define a different user info endpoint in the authorization server settings B. What in case of mobile application is something there is no, oh there is. So what the question is, what if we have a mobile app? There is no redirect URI. Yes, there is a redirect URI always, even in case of a mobile application. Remember, you always use the authorization code grant type. Previously, years ago, the mobile applications were using the password grant type, but the password grant type, the password grant type, we also call the resource owner credentials grant type. It's not used anymore and is deprecated. In the password grant type, the mobile app was taking the credentials, was sending them to the authorization server and getting back the token, but that meant that the mobile application sees the user credentials. Now, it's proved throughout the years that this approach is not secure. So that's why even for mobile applications, you will still use the authorization code grant type. What happens, and if you try a mobile application, any mobile application using the authorization code grant type, which is what they should do, it will redirect you in browser. So there is a redirect URI. It will simply open the browser. You will log in the browser, and then the browser will call back the activity. In case of an Android application, an activity always have a URI where you can call it back. So and I guess that's the same on iOS. I'm not an expert in iOS, but I think it's the same on iOS like it is on Android. So you do have a redirect URI even in the case of a mobile application. Okay. With that being said, and I proved you how to configure your token, and since you some of you asked me about the user info endpoint, no, the redirect URI. If you ask me about the redirect URI and about this restrictions added on the redirect URI, by the way, even these can be configurable. So this framework, the authorization server framework, is very configurable. Let's say easy to configure. It's almost possible to do anything with it. So you could even change that. I don't recommend you change something into something like, for example, allow the client to send any redirect URI, because it wouldn't be secure for the reasons I just explained. But you can, for example, do some other things. One of them is, you will see that if you try to use localhost, it doesn't work, and that's because the OpenID specification says that you shouldn't be able to use localhost, but sometimes developers like to use localhost, at least for development purposes, and then you can configure your own validator. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I remember precisely how to create a validator, but I can try to say custom redirect URI validator, and you can, I think, implement a consumer of type OAuth2 redirect URI valid, something like that. I think it was it's called authorization code request authentication context. So this is basically the type referring to the authorization code request, and that's exactly this what we do with this URI here. And inside it you have the redirect URI. Of course, this validator will not refer only to the redirect URI, will refer to anything on the request, and you can apply and customize any kind of restrictions with your own custom validator. So you can do that by simply overriding the consumer method, and then you have the context, and in the context you can you can get whatever you need. For example, if you want to get the authentication and apply something on the authentication, you can do that. What type was this? I think it was something like OAuth2 authentication token. Okay, something like this. And if I would like to say put a restriction on the redirect URI, then I also need the values from the registered client. It is a registered client. And do I need anything else from the context? Probably not from the context, but I would need the URI that has been requested through the authentication, which we can take like this. And then you can, for example, say something like, for all the URIs registered for this client, if it's even better to do. Actually, I think we can just use a contains. It's even easier in this case. Not say something like if in the URIs contains the URI, and maybe it's even easier to say if it does not contain, then throw an exception, throw new. I think it was something like OAuth2 authentication exception. And the exceptions are designed to take an error as a parameter. So I say error is new OAuth2 error and OAuth2 error code, and you can use any error code. Like for example, I think in this case would make sense to have an invalid request. And this is basically the authentication if you want to put it, or you can simply avoid putting it completely. And yeah, that's what I'm doing here. It's almost what's out of the box already. So it means that I at least validate the redirect URIs. But remember, I have all the details from the authentication and the client, which means that I can apply any kind of custom restriction to anything in this request. And then basically it's pretty easy to plug it in. You can plug it in the configuration. You know, this is the authorization endpoint, and you say in the authorization endpoint, get all the providers, and you simply plug in this providers. I will just take it out in a separate method to be easier to see, and you say return providers and for any provider authentication provider, let's put it like this. In the providers, if the provider is for the authorization request, you say if P instance of OAuth2 authorization request provider, which is what we want, you say set authentication validator new custom redirect URI validator was our class, see? And then you can even make use of the nice syntax Java 17 has, where you can simply put it like this. See, it's very, very easy. So that's what I did here. I plugged in for our authorization endpoint, which is basically our first request that we do in the browser. I plugged in a custom validator that I defined, and this custom validator, the only thing it does, it makes sure that the URI, the redirect URI exists in the list, which is basically what happens when you are out of the box. But I presented this to you as a matter of how you implement, and whatever you write here, the logic that you want to write here is what you want to do. The register client is the resource server. No, the register client is the client. That's why it's called a client and not a server, no? So in OAuth2, you have three different entities. You have the client, the resource server, and the authorization server. You can anytime go back to one of my previous lessons. I think it was 2 lessons ago where I detailed about OAuth2 and OpenID Connect. It's very important to make well the difference between these entities to understand how they work, okay? The resource server is something that we will discuss in one of the next lessons. So yeah, that was, and just to now make everything complete, the same thing I did here for the authorization endpoint, you can do for almost anything else. So you can do that. You can implement similarly the configuration for the token endpoint. For example, if I want to do some validations here on the token endpoint, then I can simply do the token endpoint this way. Any kind of endpoint, the introspection endpoint that we will discuss as well, any kind of customization is done in a very similar way to what I already did for the authorization endpoint. So that's another essential thing. If you will ever implement an authorization server, remember that everything is customizable, and it's mainly this way in which you will customize any request and the validations, especially, which are most likely the things that you would like to customize on your request. Now, I started, and even last time, I started by saying that we have, in most cases, JWT tokens, which are non-opaque tokens. Remember what a non-opaque token is. It's a token that contains information inside it. And this is pretty clear why, no? Because if you take this, you put it in JWT.io, it's what we did already. This is data inside the token. That's why we call it non-opaque. You can see through it, okay? If it's non-opaque, it's transparent. It means it contains data, you can see through it. Of course, it depends on the type of token, how much transparent it is. Most of the JWTs are just signed, not encrypted. But there are categories of JWTs which are also encrypted. We call them JVEs. It's a different story. Anyway, it's still non-opaque. It contains data inside. But it's also possible to implement an authorization server that issues opaque tokens. Opaque tokens are tokens that don't contain information. In order to get information whenever you have such a token, you would have to call an introspection endpoint. Let me show you how to do that as a, let's say, final thing for this today's lesson. And we anyway will have to prove how this works with the resource server whenever we get into the resource server, and that's when we will have a complete system almost, because I will not implement the client, since the client is usually either a web or a mobile application and I'm a backend developer. Yeah, as at least the part we can say we implement a full backend application. What else? So I said I want to prove you also how to create opaque tokens, didn't I? That means that on the client here, you will see that you have the token settings that you can define. So token settings. Okay, this is it. And you asked me at the very beginning, how do I change the token lifetime? Can I change the token lifetime? Yes, token settings is also the way in which you do that. So let me show you also how to do that. So access token time to live, for example, if I want to change the access token time to live, the default is 300 seconds. But if I want to have a different duration, let's say duration of seconds 900. Okay. So that's the answer to your one of your previous questions. Can I change the life of the access token? The answer is yes, you can do that. It's actually pretty easy to do that. What else can we change? We can change the type of the access token. Let me remember how I do that. Access token format, of course. And in the access token format, which talks an OAuth2 token format, you can say reference or self-contained. If it's self-contained, which is the default, it's a non-opaque token. If it's reference, then it's an opaque token. So if I'm changing this to reference, what we expect is in the response here, instead of having, as you see it now, as a non-opaque token, as a JWT that we were able to see in JWT.io and see its contents, we will see an opaque token which is no longer containing details, but you can still get those details through the introspection endpoint. ID token life, isn't it the same way? I don't think I ever tested, but I expect that if access token can be changed this way, ID token can be changed the same way. Refresh token, authorization code, access token. Strange, I see it not, but we will see later. Maybe it's the same as this one. I will have to revert on that. Cool. So let me prove you how this works with reference. I'm going to restart and retake the procedure. If this doesn't change the ID token as well, I will go to documentation and review it, because I don't remember. Okay, it started, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to take it here. And I'm going to go back here, login, user, password. Take the code, go back and place the code in my request, send it, and you see the access token now. So first expires in changed. I think it's the same for both ID token and access token. Access token is no longer a JVT. It's clearly seen. It doesn't have a JVT token anymore, does it? I mean, you can even compare it with the ID token. ID token will always be a JVT. It doesn't make sense for the ID token to be something else than something non-opaque. But for the access token, well, it makes sense. It depends on how you want to make the access, to make the authorization in the end. So you see, this is not something that contains details anymore. I can't show you anything about it. We can see that this remained. It's still and expiration is 2014, which is probably 900 seconds or something, hopefully. It's in half an hour. It's half an hour, 900 seconds. If yes, then it means I was right. Going back, and the question then is, of course, how do we still get details about the user and its permissions? Because then still based on the access token, the resource server, which we will implement in one of the next lessons, should be able to apply the authorization rules. But since you don't have the authorities, you don't have even the username, then the question is, how the heck do I use an opaque token then to get the access token, to get the details through the access token? And then the answer is simple. You use what is called the introspection endpoint, which, by the way, should also be visible in the OpenID configuration. Here it is. This is the introspect. Maybe I can even click it. Okay, it opened the introspection. Be careful, it's a post, and it takes the opaque access token as a parameter, and you say send, and too many redirects. Wow, that's interesting. Not sure how is that even. I think it might be because, can it be because of my implementation here? Something wrong, I'm not sure. Suppose it might even be a bug or something. I'm not sure. Maybe it is, maybe not. Let's see if it's actually related to the authentication. Oh, here it is. So it's actually a bug. Wow, that's something nice. I will note it down. I will note it down. So bug in introspection. See, we just discovered the bug, so that's the way to. You know what I will do what I'm doing when I'm discovering a bug. I will see if this hasn't been already reported, and if it hasn't been already reported, I will report it, and then I will solve it. And that's what I recommend you do as well. So you saw when I didn't have the authentication, it didn't tell me what would you have expected to happen if the authentication wasn't granted. You would have expected to have a 403 or a 401, didn't you? HTTP status. Instead, we had a 500 and a very strange error message with too many redirects. This is a bug for sure. So you can see now we have added the correct authentication, and in the response you have all the details about the user, and that's basically how you work with an Opaque token. You can't get from the token details, but you can use the token through the introspection endpoint to get the details. And that's basically everything that I think I will have time to prove today, but I still have some questions. So let me see. So then, did I answer this? I worry about CSRF for my mobile app. So CSRF is not used together with JVT. The CSRF token is used only when you have a backend generating the front end, and you have a session, server-side session managed, and you want to make sure that only your front end is using the session on the backend side, so that you don't have, for example, someone sending an email with a link, and when your user clicks the link, they will do actions on impersonating them. So CSRF doesn't have anything to do with the mobile application, okay? If you have a mobile application, you will have OAuth. If you have OAuth, you don't have CSRF. You don't have CSRF at your client level. You will have CSRF at the access level. So I'm gonna show you that actually. So the login page on the authorization server still uses CSRF tokens. That's normal, but your client doesn't use, okay? So if I'm going to that, oh, I'm already logged in, sorry, let me restart to avoid having a session, and I will prove it that the login uses CSRF, but your application will not, because the login will be on the authorization server, and remember, it needs to be on the authorization server because you are not using password grant type, and you shouldn't use password grant type because that one is deprecated, okay? So can do like this, and we can go here and we can see that's using CSRF, okay? But that's at the authorization server side, not on your application server, on your application side, either client or server, okay? Hope I answered the question with CSRF. So I'm going to the next one. Let's say I get my access token as 2 minutes and refresh token as 1 hour. Does that mean that my application is vulnerable to a hacker for 2 minutes? How to fix this? I'm not sure if I understand the question. So in order to use the refresh token, you need anyway to re-authenticate. So that means that if someone wants to use the refresh token, say it steals your refresh token, they will still need to also have your client credentials. So it's not that easy actually to hack something like this. If that was the question, I hope I answered it. If not, I will try to, please try to rephrase, and I will try to answer it. So a couple of words about other types of client authentication, secret JVT. A couple of words is not enough to say about the secret JVT. Let me explain that one. Is the way in which your authorization server can also act as a resource server, so the authentication can be done via a JVT instead of basic. So you know what we will do? We will do it this way. I will first show you what the resource server is in the next lessons. And when you know what authorization server is and what a resource server is, we can discuss also the client secret JVT. That's because it's somehow a mix where your authorization server, it's taken authentication also as a resource server itself, okay? I tried implementing a Spring authorization server flow for API gateway with endpoints, and I got a CSRF token problem. Again, it depends. I'm not sure what we did in there. Might have needed to actually disable the CSRF in that case, but I don't want to tell you that you should do that, because unless I see exactly the case, I cannot give advice on the problem. Enable web flag security is reactive stuff. We will get to that later. I don't want to discuss reactive and non-reactive at the same time, because I will make a shawarma out of my lessons. How is JVT security a complete authorization strategy if someone copies my access token they can access my application. Yeah, that's why it's called a bear token. But there are two things. First of all, an access token expires, and it should expire quite often. Secondly, you also have a revocation possibility, and this revoke endpoint allows you to make a token invalid if you suspect that someone stole it. So I would consider it complete, because you have all the possibilities. First of all, you have the possibility to make it expire, and you have the possibility to revoke it. And of course, let's also remember that we use some keys to sign the tokens, and these keys are not there forever. Actually, it's recommended that you use key rotations every now and then, which means that someone will not be able to actually recreate the tokens even if they steal somehow the secret key, being able to sign the token. And the last question for today, and then I think we can end it. Is it okay to store the JVT token as a local storage? Yes, that's okay. You can do that. It's the best solution. It's actually the only one I have seen. So yes, it's no problem storing your token as a local storage. In case you have, for example, an Angular or a React application, you can use the browser local storage, but make sure that your access token expires in a, let's say, short enough time. Is it possible to customize this default login page? Yes, but that's casual Spring Security, is not authorization server. So just search for form login customization in Spring Security documentation. As a starting point for you, it's very simple. It starts actually from adding a customizer here. So that's basically where you can add different things, including your custom page. So you can define a custom page and specify your server to use that instead of the default one. So as a starting point, that should help you know how to customize it. And in a future video, could you discuss using the authorization server as a federated identity server? Yes, I could do that, but I really have to document myself a bit more on that, because I don't feel comfortable yet with this new authorization server. Remember this, guys, this authorization server has been released a couple of months ago. So as much as I want, I didn't really have the time to know it by heart. I know a lot of things already about it, as you can see, but I don't claim that I know it by heart. But I do invite you, by the way, there are 2 sessions about the new authorization server at this next spring one, which will be in a couple of weeks from now on, and it's free. So do register for spring one. It's online, it's free, and it has a lot of nice sessions about new Spring technologies, including the new authorization server. I will be part of also one of the presentations, and I do invite you for that. You will see some more stuff, including, I think, the federated stuff. Okay, and I think, guys, I see it's I answered hopefully your questions, and even if I didn't do that, in memory or JDBC token, let's continue in the next, because I see you have a lot of questions. I love the fact that you have a lot of questions. I just don't have the time, and I don't want to treat them easy. Like, I don't want to just give you a 10 seconds answer, but there will be more lessons. And for example, the database stuff, we will discuss it probably in the next lesson. So let's meet again next week. In the next lesson, discuss some more stuff. When we finish with the authorization server, we get to the resource server, and then we get to some other nice stuff. Guys, with that being said, thank you so much for being so many, and thank you so much as usual for having so many questions. I invite you for my next lessons, and of course to keep in touch also on social media in general. Comments in the comment section, LinkedIn, Twitter, find me everywhere. Until next time we meet, I wish you a warm, have an excellent time for study further, and I'm waving goodbye and say cheers, guys.